So we've come to the stage of the tadpole's development where not a lot is happening. There's no sign of any legs just yet. The tadpoles of course are getting bigger, but legs should be appearing within the next few weeks, and as soon as they do I will make sure I have a video all about it to show you. So I thought what we'd do this week is, as we did a couple of weeks ago, is we'll take a look back at an older series of Frog Watch. This time we'll look at the year 2017, and actually having edited the video already, I think 2017 was a really interesting year. There are some really fascinating observations made that year, so I really think you're going to enjoy it. So make sure you stick around and watch the entire thing, so I really do think it's going to be a good one. Of course, 2017 was the year that I decided it would be a good idea to play the Frog Watch theme tune throughout the entire video, every single video, which in hindsight probably wasn't the best choice, but don't let that put you off. It will be a really good video. So thank you very much for joining me for this week's episode of Frog Watch. But before the tadpoles come back to breed at the pond, I've got some work to do. If you take a look at the pond, you can see it's full of rubbish and dead plant matter, and a lot of this needs to be cleared up. So I've got some work to do, so let's get started. I think we're done. That was exhausting. Let's take a closer look at the spawn, and as you can see from these underwater shots, there is a lot of it. A single female frog will lay around 2,000 to 3,000 eggs in a big clump like you can see here. Despite its name, the common frog is not as common as it once was. Many of their usual breeding places are disappearing as ponds become filled in or polluted because of housing development or intensive agriculture. It's estimated that 50% of frogs in Britain live in garden ponds. And here is a closer look at one that lives in this one. And also a friend pops up to say hello. I'm amazed at the colour of this one, it's such a great red colour. This is a great shot of our tadpoles swimming freely in a pond. But before we get too far ahead, let's take a look at how the frog spawn developed over the last couple of weeks. Here, a little over a week after they were laid, you can see how the tadpoles are developing. What was once a little black dot is now a little black comma. A few days later, and you can now begin to see a distinct head and tail in the developing tadpoles. This stage happens about 2 weeks after they've been laid. The tadpoles will begin to develop gills, and then they'll be ready to hatch. Tadpoles aren't the only creatures living in the pond. Here we have a visitor to the tadpoles. This is a common newt, also known as a smooth newt. As the name suggests, they are the most common species of newt found in the UK. This little chap is probably having a spot of lunch, as tadpoles make a great snack for newts. Life is hard for a tadpole. Trying to catch the newts underwater is difficult, but I did manage to catch a few fleeting glimpses. Unfortunately, I don't have the technology to see what I'm filming underwater, so it's just down to luck. Okay, now I've picked out quite a lot of tadpoles in there. Now ideally I want to know exactly how many I'm putting into the tank. We have 15 litres of water in here, which means we could put 30 to 45, that's 2 to 3 tadpoles per litre. So around 30, certainly no more than 45 in there. So I need to know exactly how many I'm putting in. I've managed to separate 10 into here, so we're going to put them in little by little. So the first 10 are going to be going in now. There they go, into their new home. We found this caterpillar floating in the pond, and my daughter here rescued it. Now I'm not an expert in caterpillars, and in the UK there are over 2,600 species of butterfly moth, so identifying them is a bit of a challenge. But I had a look at some pictures online and I found one that looked similar. It might not be the one, but for now we'll go for it. It looks similar to the caterpillar of the large yellow underwing moth. It's one of the most common moths to be found in Britain, and can also be found in North America, even as far north as Canada and Alaska. Okay, so let's return to the tadpoles in the tank, because as you can see, some of them have found the spinach leaves. They will swim around like this, munching on the edges of the leaves. It can be quite a sight when one leaf is surrounded by a whole bunch of tadpoles. Now, pond water can be full of microbes, that's why I'm wearing gloves. It's probably an over precaution, but it's better safe than sorry. There are a couple of creatures I found in this piece of pondweed I pulled out. One is a water louse, which is what I want to get, and the other is a leech. Now this leech is proving very difficult to pick up. It can flatten its body to the ground, and I really can't get a good grip on it. The water louse here is a little bit easier to pick up, but not much. Anyway, this is what I really want to put in the tank. This is a water louse. It's a little beetle. It will feed on the detritus in the tank, and there'll be plenty of food for it in there. There's another one we can just grab here. This one's quite tricky to pick up, but we got it. That one's an interesting one actually. We get a better look at that one later, but that is a pregnant female. I'll go into more detail about that in a moment. But this leech, I will need to return this to the pond. I'm not going to put this in the tank because it is, again, it's carnivorous. It will eat small invertebrates, little tiny water bugs. I don't think they're bloodsuckers. There are so many different species, it's very difficult. It's going to be impossible to tell exactly what this is. So back to the leech. I really want to get this into the pond. Trying to pick it up with a bit of a stick, bit of a branch, is still almost impossible to get. It just flops around. It does not want to be picked up at all. I'm able to finally get it, and then we go back into the pond. But just before we do, let's have a quick look at it and see how long it stretches out. But there it goes, drops into the pond. Now we can actually, if I quickly get my camera under the water, we can actually get a really good look at it swimming around, using this sort of undulating motion. It swims around and it will attach itself to a plant as it tries to recover from its ordeal of being poked and prodded by some huge giant creature. This one here is a pregnant female. What I can see here, you may be able to see it's a little bit out of focus, but there is a pale yellow blob on her underside. Now water louses are crustaceans, and they have what's called a brood pouch. So the female will lay her eggs into this brood pouch, and they will actually mature and molt several times before being given birth to as miniature versions of the adults. They'll be very, very small, and they will then grow into it. So it'll be kind of a live birth. Here we can see two of the water lice I put into the tank last week. If you saw the last episode, you may remember I put in a mating pair, but we couldn't get a very good look last time. But here is a great view. The larger male is on top of the smaller female. Water lice are also known as water slaters, aquatic sourbugs, and a water hoglouse. Its scientific name is Acellus aquaticus. It looks very much like a woodlouse, and indeed they are from the same group of crustaceans called isopods. This means they are not insects, but are more closely related to crabs and lobsters. The body is flat and has 9 segments including the head. It has 6 pairs of legs and 2 pairs of antennas. There are 2 species of water slaters found in the UK, and they can be told apart by looking at the head. The common water louse has 2 white spots on its head, and the one-spotted water slater predictably only has 1. If we change the camera angle, we can see these have 2 spots, and so are the common variety. So what's actually happening here? I briefly explained last time out, but what will happen is the larger male will position himself over the top of the female and guard her from other males. He's waiting for her to molt her hard exoskeleton, as this is the only time he'll be able to mate with her. They molt just like woodlice in 2 halves. The rear part of the exoskeleton gets shed first, followed by the front. During this time, the male will mate with her. He will then guard her until her exoskeleton hardens and no other male will be able to mate with her. The female will then lay her eggs into a brood pouch which is kept on the underside of her body, and she will give birth to live babies which will be miniature versions of the adults. You may be able to see at the rear end a pair of feathery gills flicking up and down. This is where they breathe. They are adapted to live in low oxygen environments like you find at the bottom of ponds, and they can tolerate moderate levels of pollution. They are omnivores. I did mistakenly refer to them as herbivores last week, but they will feed on decaying plant and animal matter. Okay, so let's take a closer look at some of these tadpoles. These are some of the larger ones that are swimming up in the corner, and you may notice 1 or 2 of them have legs. It can be quite tricky to tell, but the legs will stick right back out. They're very close to the underside of the tail. Now, if you saw last episode, you'll have seen the focus on that one was of the mating pair of water lice that we had in here. We had the larger male water louse was attached to the back of the smaller female one, and he was protecting her, waiting for her to molt so he could mate with her. Now this one we can see here is the female. Whether it's the same female that we saw or whether it's a different one that was in here, I'm not entirely sure, but you can see that that pale bluish kind of colour pouch that she has on her underside, that is her brood pouch, and you can actually see, if you look really closely, there are some eggs in there. Now every now and again you can see some movement, so I think she's actually in the process of laying those eggs right now, and you can see those kind of eggs moving around every now and again, and it's a pretty amazing footage. I've never seen anything like this before, and I'm so glad I managed to capture this one. This is a newly emerged adult damselfly. If we take a close look at it, we can actually tell a lot about it from its markings. In the area that I live, there are 2 common species of damselfly, the common blue and the large red. The large red damselflies are the first to emerge, with the blue coming a few weeks later. You can see this one has a red abdomen. Also, we can tell this is an immature female from its black thorax and yellow stripes. Those yellow stripes will change to red as she matures. You can see here is one newly emerged. It will stay on this leaf while it dries out its wings before flying away. Nearby there is another adult emerging, and I managed to set up a time lapse of this one. If you look carefully, you should be able to see its wings enlarging as they fill with fluid. Unfortunately, the battery on my camera ran out before the process was complete. Each picture here was taken 60 seconds apart, so this is approximately an hour and a half of footage. This is one of the most advanced tadpoles in the tank. It has the biggest, most developed legs. You can see how its body is changing shape too. It's becoming longer with a more defined head, which is becoming slightly triangle shaped as the front legs are developing under the skin. At this stage, I am regularly feeding them both spinach leaves and bloodworm, as both the tadpoles with and without legs will still feed on both food sources. So when I checked in on the tadpoles this morning, I found this little guy climbing up the side of the tank. You can see it has its front legs now. They probably only emerged recently, as it still has its long tail. Over the next few days that will shrink and he'll be a little froglet. But he's not the only one. We have 2 or 3 more that have front legs and several more that will get them soon. We even have one tadpole with one front leg, the other is still to emerge. Here we have a great close-up view of a tadpole on the verge of getting its front legs. If you look carefully, you can see them moving around under the skin. I was hoping to catch them popping out on camera, but I wasn't that lucky. Once the front legs have emerged, the tail will begin to shrink and be reabsorbed into the body. This will only take around 2 or 3 days for the tail to completely disappear. During this time, the little froglet will stop eating. It uses its tail as an energy source. Also, by this time, the little froglet's lungs will be fully functional and it can no longer use its gills as they have now disappeared. So I want to make sure there is enough food for every single tadpole and little froglet to last over the weekend. So a little bit of a challenge because there are three different types of food I need to feed them. Spinach leaves, I'm going to put the fish in there, and also I need some aphids for the little frogs once they emerge. Okay, so here we have the 3 different types of food. We have the spinach leaf over here that's being eaten by a tadpole there. We have a couple of bits of fish. There's a bit down here which is being pecked at by one of the tadpoles. And then over here, not sure how well you'll be able to see these, but we have lots of the aphids, little green fly, all around this area. So if any frogs do emerge and become hungry, like this one here, may well need to eat over the next day or 2. There should be something for them to eat to keep them going until I can feed them again on Monday. As for the rest of them, well, they should all have something they need to eat should they get hungry. The fish proving popular with the tadpoles, and the water louse has come over to see as well. We've got loads of little frogs in our tank now, and there are some real characters that I can pick out. Let me see if I can show you some. There's this guy who always seems to be doing the splits. This guy here who is always upside down, either floating on his back or on his side, and when he swims he spins around in little circles. I have a feeling though that this one's not too healthy, but we'll keep an eye on him, see how he develops. There's also this little guy here who has a twisted back. Now I noticed this as a tadpole. His tail was bent at 90 degrees to his body, and as he's developed you can kind of see this twist in his spine. So again, something that's probably not quite right there. I've managed to find a weed in the garden that was covered in aphids. You can use aphids or black fly, anything very small, and the best thing to do is just to snip off a stem and place the whole thing in the tank. And as you can see, the frogs there will notice that there are little things on the stem of the plant, and they will stalk them. They will look out for the movement, and then when they get close enough and they're sure that there's something there, they will launch themselves just like that, and they will eat the aphids. So I have placed in a load of crickets into the tank now, and instantly the frogs are attracted to the movement. As I've said in the previous video, the frogs will only go for live food. If something doesn't move, they don't see it, so they will only go for food that is moving, and these crickets move around a lot. They are very fast, and it's actually quite a challenge for these frogs to catch them. So out here in the garden there is something else I want to show you. If you look here on this plant, in actual fact you can see it on quite a lot of the plants out here in the garden. There's this little patches of foam on the plant, and maybe I'll bend this down you can get a better look. You can see there. Now that is called cuckoo spit, and if we wipe away some of this foam we will see little bugs underneath. So let's do that and have a look and see what they look like. So if I take a tissue and carefully wipe away some of this, you may be able to see the creature that's made all this froth. This froth is produced by the creature hiding inside it. It sucks the sap from the plant and uses the fluid to create this froth that serves several purposes. It hides the insect, provides insulation against heat and cold, and keeps the creature moist. The froth also tastes bad, deterring predators. Running away from us a little bit. Here he is. Oh, if I can get him on this tissue, have a closer look. Oh, it's come out onto the leaf. So we can get the camera to focus. This little creature is called a froghopper, or more accurately, this is the nymph, the juvenile form that will undergo gradual metamorphosis before reaching its adult stage. Unlike a larva, a nymph already resembles the adult apart from a lack of wings and its coloration, and it will not pupate. Instead, it will undergo several molts. Another name for this is the spittle bug, due to the froth that the nymph produces. Adult frog hoppers are expert jumpers and leap from plant to plant. Some species can jump up to 70 centimeters vertically. This is more impressive performance relative to body weight than fleas. The frog hopper can accelerate at 4,000 meters per second over 2 millimeters as it jumps, experiencing over 400 Gs of acceleration, and it can jump 100 times their own length. Okay, well let's leave him be. He can go back to his home. So I'm going to go into it in a little bit more detail, but basically I found 2 frogs that have died over the weekend, and also I've sort of identified 1 or 2 of the frogs and some of the tadpoles that don't seem to be developing quite right. Let me show you a little bit closer up in some of them. So this little guy here, his back legs appear to bend the wrong way. They're kind of bending forward. It's very difficult to see. But it looks very strange and is definitely not a good sign. Disturbingly, I seem to have found another one that's actually further along developed, but I'll try and zoom in. The zoom isn't great on this camera, but you can see quite clearly there his right back leg is sticking out at a very, very odd angle. That's definitely not normal. You can also see there are 2 other tadpoles. There's this guy over here. You can kind of see his tail is kind of a little bit strange. It's kind of his back twists and his tail twists out to the side. And there was another one. This one here has it slightly as well. It's not quite as pronounced as the other one, the one that I think has already died. But yeah, that's two more that have slight defects as well. Actually, there's another one over there. If you can zoom in on this one there, in the centre. That one's got a wonky tail as well. That's quite pronounced. That's kind of similar to the other one. Have loads and loads of frogs in there. There are haven't had to count up yet, but there are definitely a lot in there, and there's not really enough space for them now. So I think what I'm going to do, so what I usually do is I am going to release some of them back into the pond, but we'll definitely keep some to grow them a little bit more. So I'm going to release maybe about half of the ones that are in there, and the rest we can keep hold of. Okay, so I've been catching them one by one and releasing them into the pond. There was one in the centre of the screen there. There's another 2 over by this flower. You can see one sitting on top of the flower there. And I think if we scroll down a little bit here, we should see another one. And yeah, so we're on a slightly happier note now that we have released some into the pond. It's now up to these guys to look after themselves and to find their own food and hopefully grow into big, strong adult frogs. I've been badly let down by my pet food supplier with potentially disastrous consequences for this series and for these frogs. Let me explain a little bit more. So I've been unable to be able to get the second instar brown crickets that I've been feeding these guys with for the last few weeks. The pet shop that I go to had mislabeled their boxes, and in the second instar boxes they were actually much too big. They were at least third instar crickets in those boxes, and the pet shop was very unhelpful, and I was very disappointed with the customer service I received. But the consequences are basically I don't have any food for these guys. So I think the only thing I can do, the only responsible thing I can do, is to release all these little frogs back into the pond. So I've released most of the frogs back into the pond now. Of course, this was always going to happen, but I did not expect to have to do it just yet. I hate to see them go, as I'm now no longer in control. I can't make sure that they feed, and I'll never know if they survive, which is the hardest thing about looking after wild frogs. I'll probably never see these frogs again, but I have to trust in nature and hope that they'll be okay. One thing that does make me feel happy is just a few moments after releasing them, I saw 2 of the frogs attempt to catch a fly that was buzzing around them, so they're obviously not too traumatised by the release process. Okay, so I have released all except of the 3 biggest and fattest frogs, and what I've done is I've placed another branch full of black fly. You can see how much is there, and what I'm going to try and do is keep these 3. These are the 3 fattest and most well-fed frogs that I have, and they should be absolutely fine to last until Monday, and then over the weekend I can make sure I get some proper food for them. Okay, a bit of change of scenery. I'm at home, and this is the tank that you may have seen me set up in, I think it was the 3rd episode of this series. Now I had 8 little frogs in here. I've not shown them on the camera before, but these ones I've just been looking after at home just for fun. but it looks like may have to switch to these guys a little bit. Now, when I got back from work on Friday, I rang around every pet shop in the local area. No one sells little tiny crickets that I've been feeding these guys. I had real trouble and I didn't know what I was going to do. Then I had a bit of a brainwave. I remembered last year I fed some of my frogs some maggots at one point. So I rang up a local fishing tackle shop, and they had some maggots. So I went down there and I've got myself a tub of little white maggots. So yeah, so this is a literal lifesaver. I was really worried about being able to feed these guys, but I've got a big supply of food now, and this will definitely keep me going until I'm able to get some more crickets. Yeah, they're all getting quite active now, but I'm not able to get anything. There's three at the bottom here. Oh, there we go, we got it! He actually leapt up and grabbed the wonderful side of the glass. Fantastic, they're all pretty happy now. This dragonfly is doing something very interesting. Notice its posture. It's pointing its abdomen high up into the air. This is a common dragonfly behaviour when they're getting hot. This is called the obelisk posture. Now, the obelisk posture is a handstand-like position that some dragonflies and damselflies assume to prevent overheating on sunny days. The abdomen is raised until its tip points at the sun, minimising the surface area exposed to solar radiation. I'm really glad I happened to spot this dragonfly. Last year I didn't see any around the pond at all. Hopefully I'll be able to spot a different species over the next few weeks. So over the last couple of weeks I've been supplementing the frog's usual cricket diet with some maggots. Now, there is a downside to feeding frogs maggots. Let me show you. Maggots are the larvae of flies, in this case the greenbottle fly. If you saw the last few episodes, I may have mentioned that some of the maggots tunnelled under the gravel as soon as I put them in. Obviously the frogs were unable to eat them. I expected the maggots to drown or otherwise fail to pupate, as they usually prefer drier conditions. Obviously that was not the case, and they completed their life cycle, and now there are several flies in the tank. A lot of them have fallen into the water, but I was hoping that the rest would be picked off by the frogs. But judging by this little guy's performance, that doesn't look like it's going to happen. So last week we saw a dragonfly out by the pond, and I've been hoping to see some different species out there, and in a way I have, but let me show you what I found. So unfortunately I haven't seen any live dragonflies, but I have seen evidence that they were here. This is a dragonfly casing, or exuviae, the remains of the exoskeleton of the nymph. There are several of these found around the pond. Now I can actually use this to try and identify the species of dragonfly that emerged from it. Using an online guide and looking at the body shape, eye position and shape, and other details, I believe I've identified this as a southern hawker dragonfly. Here is a picture of what an adult would look like. It is a shame that I missed seeing them emerge, but I am glad to know that they have been breeding here. So I happened to notice just below the surface of the water, attached to the stem of this plant, was a dragonfly nymph. This is the same species as the empty casing I found last week, but this one is not an empty case, it's alive and ready for the dragonfly to emerge. As I explained last week, it can be tricky to identify species, especially for an amateur like myself, but I believe I identified this species as a southern hawker dragonfly. These nymphs are ambush predators that eat aquatic insects and tadpoles, and will even take fish, although there are none in this pond. They will emerge as adults towards the end of June through to August, and amazingly they will have lived in the pond as nymphs for 3 years. When I returned to the pond a while later, I found the nymph had climbed the stem and was well on the way to emerging. Final stage larvae sit in shallow water near the surface for several days, getting ready for their final molt and starting to breathe air. Most species leave the water during the morning, but hawkers usually do so under the cover of darkness. This raises the possibility that I've misidentified the species, or this particular dragonfly is unusual, as this was happening around 3:30 PM. So as I've said before, this is the 3rd year that I've looked after frogs. The first year I didn't video it for YouTube, but last year I did. But this year I must say these frogs are much bigger than any I've had before. It makes me feel confident that these frogs will be strong enough to look after themselves once I've released them, and I'm happy that I've been able to give them a good start in life. But one consequence of their size is that I've had to get them bigger food. If you've been following along with the series, you will have seen me feed them brown or banded crickets. This is the most common food I've fed them, in previous years also, but I've always fed them second instar crickets. Now, an instar is a developmental stage of arthropods such as insects between each molt until sexual maturity is reached. Arthropods must shed the exoskeleton in order to grow or assume a new form. A second instar means they've molted once and they're now in their second stage. These frogs are now big enough to move on to third instar crickets, something I've never been able to do before. So to feed them, I simply pick up the egg box where they're all hiding and give it a shake and carefully put it back. If I cut the music for a moment, listen to this one. It is a male that has developed its wings, and you can see him rub them together and singing. I think it's quite a pleasant sound. But there is one more that's even bigger. This one is very large and very dark. Just compare it to the size of some of the others. I believe this is a female as it does not have wings like the previous one and doesn't sing. This one must be nearly adult size. Banded crickets are smaller than some of the other crickets and locusts available in the pet trade, but still much too big for my frogs. It's probably the same size as they are. I managed to spot this wriggly red worm-like thing. I'm unsure about what it actually is, but my best guess is that it's a tubifex worm. Tubifex are annelids, part of a large subgroup which includes many terrestrial and freshwater species, including the earthworm. These worms live in mud and sediment at the bottom of ponds and rivers and eat detritus and bacteria, and they can tolerate quite high levels of pollution. They are harmless to other inhabitants of the tank and are often sold as fish food. And apparently there are some fish that love them so much they will eat them until they make themselves sick. Sounds a bit like me and chocolate. Well, the time has come to say one last goodbye to our frogs as we release them back to the pond. So today should be a happy day. Of course, I am always sad to see them go, as I'll never really know if they survive or not. But these frogs belong in the wild. I've looked after them as best I could to try and give them a good start to their lives, but the rest is up to them. So I started out the series with 41 tadpoles, and at the end it's come down to these two. We did have some casualties along the way, and there were some physical defects in some of the frogs that meant they couldn't survive. But if you remember, I had to release most of the frogs back in episode 14, when I was let down by the pet store and ran out of food for them. So now let's say goodbye to the last frogs of Frog Watch 2017. It's not only the frogs that are released today, it's also time for the flying ants to leave the nest. This happens across the country on almost the exact same day. It often happens on a warm sunny day after rainfall. Almost all of these will be males, but also young queens will be leaving to form their own colony. The males will mate with the young queens and then disperse. They are a very important source of food for birds and other insect-eating animals. So I have some more frogs to release. These are ones I've kept at home, and I have 7 to put back into the pond. Over the next few days, these frogs should leave the pond and begin their new lives out here in the wild. Well, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate you sticking to the end of the video. Can't tell you how much I appreciate it. You can find me on other social media as well. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. I've got a Discord server and a Patreon account if you think I'm worth it. All the links need to be in the description below. If you have any questions, you can send me messages on any of those platforms or stick them down in the comment section down below. And thank you so much once again. Please do subscribe if you haven't already and come back next week for some more Frog Watch. I'll see you then. Goodbye.